"Fly this helicopter and I'll marry you," the boss taunted with a cruel smile, pointing to the $3 million machine in the main hangar. The executive's laughter echoed through the space as Kesha Williams continued to wipe the cabin glass, as if she hadn't heard the public humiliation. Robert Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Aviation Corporation, was in his element. At 45, heir to a family fortune and owner of one of the largest private aviation companies in the country, he loved these moments of humor at the expense of his employees, especially when the victim was someone like Kesha, a 38-year-old black cleaning lady who had been cleaning his offices for 2 years. "Seriously, guys, look at her pretending she didn't hear that," Robert continued, gesturing dramatically to the 5 vice presidents accompanying him on the hangar tour. "I bet she doesn't even know the difference between a helicopter and a ceiling fan." More laughter. Kesha paused for a moment, watching her reflection in the clean glass of the aircraft. Her eyes briefly met Robert's through the reflection, and for a split second, something passed between them. A strange, almost defiant calm that made his smile waver slightly. "Hey, you." Robert clapped his hands loudly, as if calling a dog. "I'm talking to you. How about accepting my challenge? If you can at least turn this machine on, I promise that everyone here will be witnesses to our wedding." The provocation was too cruel to ignore. Kesha knew that. For the past 2 years, she had been tested daily by Robert and his gang of privileged executives. Jokes about her education, comments about people like her not understanding technology, constant insinuations about her place in the company. What they didn't know, what no one there could have imagined, was that Kesha Williams had 15 years of experience as an Army combat helicopter pilot, 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 decorations for bravery, and a flight record that few men in the room could match. She had left her military career after an accident that cost her best friend's life during a rescue mission. Guilt and trauma brought her back home, where well-paying jobs for black veterans were hard to come by. Cleaning paid the bills as she tried to rebuild her life away from the skies. Kesha carefully folded the cleaning cloth and stored it in the cart. She walked slowly toward the group of men in suits, her steady pace contrasting with the anxious expectation of further humiliation that shone in their eyes. "Mr. Mitchell," she said calmly, looking him straight in the eye. "Are you serious about this proposal?" Robert laughed loudly. "Of course I am. But don't worry, sweetheart. I know it's just a joke. People like you weren't born to fly. You were born to clean." It was at that moment that something changed in the air of the hangar. Kesha didn't lower her eyes, didn't back down, didn't show the embarrassment Robert expected to see. Instead, an almost imperceptible smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. "Then let's make it official," she replied, extending her hand. "In front of all these witnesses. If I can not only start, but fly this helicopter for 5 minutes without any problems, you keep your word about the marriage. And if I fail, you're fired on the spot," Robert added, squeezing her hand with unnecessary force. "No notice, no unemployment, nothing." The handshake lasted a few seconds longer than normal. Robert tried to intimidate her with his strength, but Kesha kept her gaze steady. There was something in those eyes he couldn't quite figure out. A confidence that didn't make sense for a simple cleaning lady. The executives murmured among themselves, some already taking out their cell phones to record what promised to be the ultimate embarrassment of the arrogant cleaning lady. But as everyone prepared to witness yet another humiliation, no one noticed that Kesha was mentally checking the pre-takeoff flight protocols she had memorized years ago. No one noticed that her eyes quickly scanned the aircraft's control panel with the familiarity of someone who had flown much more complex models in wartime conditions. If you're enjoying this story of courage and reversal, don't forget to subscribe to the channel because what's about to happen in this hangar will completely redefine the concept of underestimating someone. And believe me, Robert Mitchell is about to learn a lesson he'll remember for the rest of his life. The handshake had been too firm. Robert felt it immediately, but dismissed the feeling as paranoia. A cleaning lady couldn't have the grip of someone accustomed to commanding life and death situations. "Guys, you're recording this, right?" he asked the vice presidents, who already had their cell phones pointed at him. "I want this to go viral." Cleaning lady tries to fly $3 million helicopter and wrecks it. "It'll be hilarious." Thomas Bradley, VP of Operations, laughed nervously. "Robert, are you sure? I mean, if she damages anything." "Tommy, relax. Look at her." Robert gestured dismissively toward Kesha, who was examining the helicopter with an attention to detail that none of them noticed was too professional for a lay person. "At most, she'll manage to turn on the radio. And when she fails miserably, everyone will see what happens when people like her try to step out of their lane." What Robert didn't know was that at that very moment, Kesha was mentally identifying every instrument on the dashboard. The model was a Bell 429. She had flown the same one during medical evacuation missions in Afghanistan. Her eyes quickly found the fuel controls, hydraulic pressure gauges, and GPS navigation system. Everything was exactly where it should be. While the executives commented among themselves on the employee's audacity, Kesha remembered the last time she had flown a similar aircraft. It was March 2018, and she had just been promoted to captain when she received the order to rescue wounded soldiers in hostile territory. The mission that changed her life forever. "Hey you," Robert snapped his fingers to get her attention. "Before you start this pathetic little show, how about we up the ante? If you actually manage to fly, which obviously won't happen, I'll not only keep my promise of marriage, I'll double your salary and promote you to I don't know, cleaning supervisor." Laughter echoed through the hangar again. But Robert wasn't finished. "However, when you fail, and you will fail, in addition to being fired, I want you to beg for forgiveness in front of everyone here on your knees. It will be a good lesson in knowing your limits." It was at that moment that something changed imperceptibly in Kesha's face. Her co-workers, who had gathered curiously to watch the spectacle, noticed that she didn't seem nervous at all. In fact, for the first time in 2 years, she seemed relaxed. Jennifer Santos, another cleaning employee and Kesha's only close friend at the company, whispered worriedly, "Kesha, you don't have to do this. That man is a monster." But Kesha just smiled at her friend. "Jenny, have you ever heard me talk about my time in the army?" "Never. You always change the subject when I ask." "That's because some stories can only be told when the time is right," Kesha replied, walking toward the cockpit. "And that time has come." Robert watched the conversation with growing impatience. "Enough of this nonsense, Jennifer. Get back to work. This isn't for you." He turned to Kesha with a cruel smile. "And you, sweetheart, are wasting time. Every second that passes is more humiliation accumulated for when it all goes wrong." Kesha stopped at the cockpit door and turned to Robert. "Mr. Mitchell, may I ask a question before I begin?" "You may." "Have you ever been in a situation where your life depended on making the right decision in less than 3 seconds with people counting on you to get them home alive?" The question took Robert by surprise. The tone was strange. There was no submission or nervousness. There was something he couldn't quite identify. No, obviously. Why would you ask such a ridiculous question? Just curious, Kesha replied, opening the booth door. Because where I come from, we call that Tuesday. The executives laughed, assuming it was another desperate attempt to impress. But Jennifer noticed that there was something different about Kesha's posture as she entered the cabin. Her movements were automatic, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. Inside the cockpit, Kesha allowed herself a moment of nostalgia. The familiar smell of leather and instruments immediately transported her back to the skies of the Middle East. For 2 years, she had pushed those memories to the back of her mind, trying to forget who she had been before everything fell apart. She remembered the day she received her first award. General Morrison had said, "Captain Williams, you have the keenest flying instinct I've ever seen. Never let anyone convince you that you don't belong in the skies." Now, sitting in that cockpit with the mocking voices of the executives muffled through the glass, she finally understood that the general was right. She belonged there. She always had. Robert knocked on the cockpit window. "Come on. We are wasting time with this charade. The longer you take, the more obvious it becomes that you have no idea what you're doing." Kesha adjusted her seat and looked at the control panel. Every button, every indicator was engraved in her muscle memory. She could fly that machine with her eyes closed. But as she mentally checked the pre-flight protocols, a painful memory surfaced. The last mission, the accident. Her best friend and co-pilot, Lisa Rodriguez, looking at her with complete confidence seconds before the impact that would take her life. For a moment, her hands trembled slightly on the controls. Not from fear, but from a responsibility she had carried alone for years. The responsibility to honor not only her own memory, but that of everyone who had trusted her. Outside, Robert interpreted her momentary hesitation as confirmation of his expectations. "Look at that. She can't even decide where to start. This is going to be even better than I imagined." But what Robert couldn't see was that Kesha had closed her eyes, not out of nervousness, but out of respect. A silent prayer for Lisa, for all the soldiers she had transported safely, and for the strong woman who had hidden for 2 years behind a cleaning uniform. When she opened her eyes again, every trace of doubt had disappeared. Her hands moved with military precision over the instruments, following a sequence that was engraved in her soul. What none of the men outside knew was that they were about to witness not only a demonstration of technical skill, but the resurrection of one of the best pilots the U.S. Armed Forces had ever trained. A woman who had saved more than 200 lives in combat, and was now about to rescue her own dignity. Each new laugh, each prejudiced comment from the group of executives only strengthened the determination that grew within her. It was no longer just about proving a point. It was about reclaiming who she really was. What those privileged men did not realize was that each act of contempt was fueling a force they had neither the capacity to understand nor control. Inside the cockpit, Kesha mentally began the pre-flight sequence she had performed more than 1,000 times in combat zones. But this time, it wasn't just about taking off. It was about sending a message that would echo far beyond that hangar. Her hands moved with surgical precision over the controls. She checked the hydraulic pressure, tested the anti-torque pedals, adjusted the collective. Each movement was executed with the fluidity of someone who had learned that a mistake cost lives. Outside, Robert had called more employees to watch the show. "Guys, come see this. Our cleaning lady thinks she's a military pilot." The crowd grew. Secretaries, mechanics, even some customers who were in the main office came down to the hangar. Is anyone recording in high quality? I want to post this on all our corporate profiles, Robert instructed his personal assistant, Marcus. Title: When employees don't know their limits, it's going to go viral. Jennifer Santos watched nervously from the sidelines. As the only person close to Kesha in the company, she knew there was something different about this situation. In their 2 years of friendship, she had never seen Kesha so focused. It was as if she had found something she had lost a long time ago. "Hey, Jennifer," whispered Carlos, one of the company's most senior mechanics. "There's something strange about the way she's handling the controls. My niece is taking flying lessons, and even she doesn't have this kind of confidence." Inside the cockpit, Kesha was doing much more than preparing to fly. Every second of public humiliation was being mentally catalogued. Every laugh, every prejudiced comment, every gesture of contempt, not to fuel anger, but to build something much more powerful, an unforgettable lesson. She discreetly activated the aircraft's internal recording system, a feature few knew existed on that model. Everything that was being said outside was being recorded in high definition. The taunts about people like her, the comments about knowing her place, the bets on how long it would take her to give up and cry. Robert knocked on the glass again. "Time's up, sweetheart. Either you start that machine in the next 30 seconds, or consider yourself fired for wasting company time." It was at that moment that Kesha made a decision that would change not only her life, but the entire dynamic of that company. She wasn't just going to fly the helicopter. She would demonstrate such advanced technical skill that it would force every person in that hangar to rethink everything they thought they knew about competence, merit, and prejudice. Through her headset, she tuned into the frequency of the nearby airport control tower. "Tower Charlie 7, this is helicopter November 47 Mike Delta, requesting clearance for a demonstration flight in local airspace." The response was immediate and professional. "November 47 Mike Delta, clearance approved. Maintain maximum altitude of 500 feet and a radius of 2 nautical miles." Jennifer noticed that several people stopped laughing when they heard the radio communication. The technical language, the correct use of aviation codes, the professional tone, none of this seemed to come from an inexperienced cleaning lady. Thomas Bradley, the VP who had questioned Robert about possible damage, approached nervously. "Robert, maybe we should stop this if she really damages something." "Tommy, relax," Robert replied. But there was a note of uncertainty in his voice that hadn't been there before. "Look, she's even pretending she knows how to use the radio. This is going to be even more embarrassing when she can't even start the engine." But Kesha had already started the engine. The distinctive sound of the turbines revving filled the hangar, and the main rotor began to turn slowly, gaining speed in a perfectly controlled manner. What no one could have imagined was that Kesha had begun to execute not just a demonstration flight, but a plan meticulously planned over the past 2 years. Every humiliation had been observed and documented, every injustice noted, every moment of disrespect carefully stored away. During her lunch breaks, she had used the company computers to research Robert Mitchell and his company in depth. She had discovered irregularities in safety reports, delayed maintenance, expired certifications, minor infractions that individually could result in fines, but combined and presented in the right way. Jennifer watched as Kesha did something that made her choke. She performed a complete external visual inspection of the aircraft without leaving the cockpit, using only mirrors and camera systems, a procedure that only extremely experienced pilots knew. "Carlos," she whispered to the mechanic. "That's not normal, is it?" Definitely not, he replied, his eyebrows furrowed. That's advanced military protocol. Where would a cleaning lady learn? The question died on his lips as Kesha initiated a system test that caused all the indicators on the panel to light up in perfect sequence. A diagnostic procedure that not all civilian pilots knew. Robert, who had spent the last 10 minutes joking around for the cell phone camera, began to get restless. Why is it taking so long? Just press a button and accelerate. It's not rocket science. But for Kesha, every extra second was precious. While everyone thought she was procrastinating out of nervousness, she was actually completing a safety check that no responsible pilot would skip and simultaneously preparing a demonstration that would prove once and for all that competence has no color, gender, or social class. The main rotor was now spinning at operating speed, creating a draft that caused some spectators to recoil. The navigation lights flashed in the correct sequence. The hydraulic systems responded perfectly, and the aircraft vibrated with the contained energy of a machine ready to defy gravity. It was at that moment that something extraordinary happened. Kesha not only lifted the helicopter off the ground, she did so with a smoothness and precision that left even the company's experienced mechanic speechless. The aircraft rose exactly 3 feet, hovered perfectly for 15 seconds, and then performed a 360 degrees rotation, so controlled that you could have had a glass of water on the dashboard without spilling a drop. The silence that followed was deafening. Every person in that hangar had just witnessed something that completely defied their preconceived expectations. But anyone who watched Kesha's face closely through the cockpit glass would notice something that would make the smartest among them realize that this technical demonstration was just a warm-up for something much bigger to come. What happened next shattered not only Robert Mitchell's expectations, but the entire power structure he had built based on prejudice and arrogance. Kesha not only kept the helicopter in perfect hover, she performed a sequence of technical maneuvers that made it clear to anyone with aviation knowledge that they were witnessing the work of a highly trained military pilot. A 360-degree rotation on a fixed axis, a precision-controlled descent, and then something that made Jennifer Santos gasp, a simulated auto-rotation maneuver, an emergency procedure that only combat pilots had completely mastered. Robert Mitchell, who 5 minutes ago had been joking around for the camera on his cell phone, now watched in growing silence as his cleaning lady demonstrated skills that he, with all his fortune, could never buy or pretend to possess. That's not possible, he muttered, the cell phone trembling in his hands. How can a simple what, Robert? The voice came from the helicopter's communication system. Kesha had activated the external radio, and her voice echoed through the hangar with an authority that made everyone present realize that something fundamental had changed in that dynamic. Thomas Bradley, the VP of Operations, approached Robert with a pale face. Robert, I've known aviation for 20 years. What she's doing there, only someone with advanced military training could do. Who the hell is this woman? It was then that Kesha landed the helicopter with a smoothness that would be the envy of pilots with decades of experience. When she stepped out of the cabin, there was no trace of the submissive cleaning lady they knew. Her posture was upright and confident, and her eyes shone with an intensity that made several executives instinctively retreat. Mr. Mitchell, she said, approaching the group with measured steps. I believe we have a conversation to finish about marriage, remember? Robert tried to regain his composure, but his voice came out higher than normal. Well, that was impressive, but obviously it was just a joke. You understand, right? Just a comment. Oh, but I have all the witnesses here, Kesha interrupted, gesturing to the crowd that had formed. And I also have this. She pulled a small recording device from her pocket. A complete recording of the last 30 minutes. Every prejudiced word, every comment about people like me, every instruction to humiliate me on my knees. The blood drained from Robert's face. You can't. That's invasion of privacy. Actually, Kesha smiled. It's legal to record conversations when you're part of the conversation. I learned that during my 15 years as an army captain. I also learned many other useful things. The silence in the hangar was now complete. Jennifer watched her friend with growing admiration, finally understanding why Kesha never talked about her military past. 15 years in the army, Kesha continued, her voice gaining strength. 3 tours in Afghanistan, responsible for over 200 successful medical evacuation missions. Twice decorated for bravery in combat. And for the past 2 years, I've worked as your cleaning lady, not out of necessity, but by choice, because sometimes you need to be inside the system to understand how it really works. Thomas Bradley whispered something in the ear of another executive, who immediately ran off toward the officers. The implication was clear. They needed to do damage control and fast. While you were making jokes about my competence, Kesha continued. I was watching, documenting, collecting evidence. Did you know that this company has 17 unreported security breaches in the last 6 months? That 3 of the helicopters in the fleet are flying with overdue maintenance. That Robert here has been falsifying inspection reports to save money. Robert tried to interrupt, but his voice failed him completely. Oh, and there's more. Kesha smiled. Phone recordings where you discuss how to keep employees in their place. Internal emails with explicitly racist comments about hiring the right kind of people for leadership positions. 2 years of meticulous documentation. Jennifer finally understood why Kesha always stayed late, always had access to computers and files that a cleaning lady wouldn't normally use. Carlos, the senior mechanic, approached with obvious respect. I always knew there was something different about the way you worked, the way you looked at the machines, how you understood the procedures. Please accept my apologies for never. Carlos, you never disrespected me, Kesha replied gently. In fact, you are one of the few people here who always treated me with dignity. That will not be forgotten. Robert tried one last desperate gambit. You're bluffing. This is all. It's just an elaborate ploy to try to blackmail me. It was then that Kesha took an envelope out of her pocket. Copies of all the documents have already been sent to the Federal Aviation Administration, the Department of Labor, and the trade press. The lawsuit for racial discrimination and creation of a hostile work environment was filed this morning. The envelope contained photographs of the safety violations, printouts of the discriminatory emails, and a letter from a respected law firm in the city. My lawyer estimates that damages could reach 8 figures when we consider federal fines, employee lawsuits, safety investigations, and the inevitable loss of government contracts that this company will no longer be able to honor. Thomas Bradley pulled Robert aside, whispering urgently about damage control, communications with the press, and the need for an emergency board meeting. But Kesha wasn't finished. What about our bet, Robert? You said that if I could fly this helicopter, you would marry me. In front of all these witnesses, Robert stammered, trying to form words, but Kesha raised her hand. Relax. I have no interest in marrying someone like you, but I am interested in justice. And justice in this case means that you will learn that competence has no color, gender, or social class. It means that your actions have consequences. And it means that underestimating people based on prejudice can cost you much more than you ever imagined. The sirens of the press could already be heard outside. Someone had leaked the story and reporters were arriving. Jennifer approached Kesha with tears in her eyes. "Why didn't you ever tell me all these years?" "Because sometimes people need to see with their own eyes that greatness can come from anywhere," Kesha replied, hugging her friend. "And because some prejudices can only be broken when confronted head-on, with no room for denial or rationalization." Robert, now surrounded by panicked executives and corporate lawyers talking urgently on their cell phones, looked at Kesha one last time. At that moment, he finally understood the magnitude of his arrogance and the price he would pay for it. The woman he had humiliated as a mere cleaning lady was not just a decorated military pilot. She was a strategist who had spent 2 years gathering enough evidence to destroy not only his reputation, but the entire empire based on discrimination that he had built. And most devastating of all, she had done so with the patience, intelligence, and precision of someone who really knew how to execute impossible missions. As the first press vans arrived at the hangar, and camera flashes began to flash, one question remained in the air like the echo of the still spinning propellers. When someone has dedicated 2 years of their life to systematically documenting the destruction of an empire of prejudice, is there any way back for those who built that empire on the humiliation of innocent people? 6 months later, Mitchell Aviation Corporation had filed for bankruptcy. Federal fines reached $15 million. Government contracts were cancelled, and Robert Mitchell faced not only financial ruin, but also criminal charges for falsifying security documents. Kesha Williams, on the other hand, was sitting in her new office as CEO of Williams Aviation Solutions, a company she had founded with $1 million settlement from the discrimination lawsuit. 3 former Mitchell employees, including Jennifer and Carlos, now worked as her partners. "Captain Williams," Jennifer said, entering the office with a newspaper. "The story about Robert is on the front page. Looks like he's working as a used car salesman." Kesha looked out the window where 2 of her new helicopters were being prepared for a rescue mission. "You know, Jenny, for 2 years, I mopped the floors of that hangar thinking about revenge. But I discovered that the best revenge isn't destroying someone. It's building something so great that it makes that person irrelevant." Carlos walked in shortly after, smiling. "The federal authorities just approved us for military contracts. It seems our reputation for integrity and competence has reached Washington. And to think Robert believed that people like me weren't born to fly." Kesha smiled. "He was right about one thing. I wasn't born just to fly. I was born to lead, to inspire, and to prove that dignity and competence have no color." 3 hours later, while personally piloting a medical evacuation mission, Kesha reflected on her journey. Every humiliation had strengthened her resolve. Every prejudice had fueled her strategy, and every moment of disrespect had built the fuel for her rise. Robert Mitchell had tried to define her by her position as a janitor. Now, she set the standard for excellence in her industry. He had mocked her place in the world. She had created her own world where competence and character were the only criteria that mattered. True justice was not just proving him wrong. It was demonstrating that people like Robert, who build empires on the humiliation of others, are in fact the only ones who never truly learn to fly. As the helicopter cut through the sky toward the hospital, Kesha smiled. Some lessons can only be learned when those who underestimate you realize that they not only misjudged your ability, but also accidentally fueled the greatness they were trying to suppress. If this story of transformation and justice touched you, Subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that true revenge is becoming so successful that your former oppressors become just a footnote in your biography of achievements.